Hey everybody, it's Ed. Before we get started, I've got two quick announcements. First is I want to thank some new Patreon supporters, Michael Skoranek and my parents, Edward and Susan Roberson. These three folks signed up to support the podcast on a monthly basis through Patreon, and there are a lot of benefits to doing that. And I'm expecting that my parents might unsubscribe from supporting me after they see some of the weird stuff on Patreon. It's weird but interesting. Most people seem to like it. We'll see if my parents do. But regardless, I really appreciate everybody's support. Your support, particularly financial support through Patreon, is what allows this podcast to function on a monthly and weekly basis. So I greatly, greatly appreciate it. Number two, I upgraded the podcast webpage at mountainandprairie.com. So if you go to mountainandprairie.com/podcast, there's a list of over 150 episodes that I've recorded over the years. I had no real organizational system in place for those episodes. It was just this really long list, and people seemed to be kind of overwhelmed, especially new listeners, like, well, where do I start? What do I look at? And so I built this drop-down menu. I didn't build it. My web guru, Nikki, built it on behalf of me, and we used the money from Patreon supporters to pay Nikki. And so we have a drop-down menu with about 20 different categories, and you can sort the episodes by profession or by topic that we cover. And I'm going to continue to kind of get that dialed in. But for example, if you want to see all the conversations I've had with writers over the past 6 years, just go hit writers on the drop-down menu, and it'll show you only the episodes with writers. I have the same thing for ranchers, for conservationists. I have different topics. So anyway, it should be a really good tool to help you sort through some of the back episodes if you're a relatively new listener. So I hope that helps. Thank you all for your support. I really appreciate it. I hope you enjoy this episode. Hey, this is Ed Roberson, and this is the Mountain and Prairie podcast, where I introduce you to some of the innovative individuals who are shaping the future of the American West. I meet most of these people through my work in land conservation or through my hobbies and interests that revolve around spending time up high in the mountains. My guests include ranchers, writers, entrepreneurs, conservationists, athletes, artists, adventurers, pretty much anyone who's doing important work, has an interesting story, and loves the American West. My guest today is Yemi Mobolade. Yemi is an entrepreneur, public servant, and community leader who devotes his seemingly limitless energy towards the betterment of Colorado Springs, Colorado. Born and raised in Nigeria, Yemi immigrated to the U.S. for college and eventually landed in Colorado Springs, where he's fully devoted himself to serving the community. He's a co-founder and partner in two wildly successful restaurants. He's served in various capacities within the city's government and economic development arms, and he's deeply involved in numerous nonprofit organizations. On top of all of that, he's a devoted husband and father of 3 beautiful children. Yemi and I are neighbors, and our kids have been classmates and buddies for several years. So I've had the opportunity to personally interact with him in a variety of settings over a long period of time. Ever since first meeting Yemi, I've been extremely impressed with his positivity, leadership skills, and his deep commitment to our community. Whether he's touting the economic upside of doing business in Colorado Springs or figuring out creative solutions for his restaurants to thrive in the pandemic, I've always been intrigued by Yemi. Everything from his personal backstory to why he's so obsessed with community building. So I was happy to finally get the opportunity to sit down with him and discuss it all. We met up at his office on a Sunday afternoon for an inspiring conversation about everything from his early days in Nigeria to his upcoming plans to run for mayor of Colorado Springs. We start out by discussing his move to the United States from Nigeria, and he talks about his perceptions of America from the outside looking in. We talk about his education, his commitment to his faith, and how he spent parts of his early career starting churches in various parts of the United States. We talk about his deep love for the city of Colorado Springs and why he's decided to throw his hat in the ring for mayor. We talk about his heroes, his favorite books on leadership, and how his wife and children positively influence his desire to serve. I really appreciate Yemi taking the time to chat, and I greatly appreciate his commitment to serving our community. There are lots of important lessons to be learned from Yemi, so I hope you enjoy. First thing is, neither you nor I are from Colorado.
That is correct.
Our accents show it, although your accent is a lot cooler than mine. So
that's very kind. I don't know about that, but I'll take it.
Let's just start at the beginning. Where did you grow up?
Where did I grow up? I am a naturalized immigrant. Mm-hmm. I became a U.S. citizen. This July will be 5 years.
Oh, really?
Yeah,
okay.
Fairly recent. I have lived in this great country of ours for almost 26 years now.
Wow.
I was born and raised, for the most part, in Lagos, Nigeria, and that's in West Africa.
Yes.
And so I am a Nigerian immigrant. And yeah, that's a little bit of my origin.
And so what brought you to the U.S. initially? I mean, how did you end up first coming? Was it college or was it before that?
College. Actually, I like to say opportunity. This is a land of opportunity. We were founded on that imagination, and mm-hmm. it continues to be what's so true about our nation. Mm-hmm. And for me, it was opportunity to go to school. Actually, I was supposed to go to school in Nigeria. I actually graduated from high school at age 16.
Oh, really?
But there were no universities to go to.
Uh-huh.
So let me paint a picture of how it works over there. Not everyone gets the opportunity to go to college. Here in the U.S., if you want to go to college, you can go to college. Sure. Not true in many parts in many places around the world. Mm-hmm. You have to take a national exam, and a few that are able to get a score have the opportunity, the right score, have the opportunity to go to a college or university.
Okay.
I was fortunate enough to get that score. I think I barely made the cutoff. But the problem was that there was still no schools to go to because the schools were on strike. Mm. When I graduated, it was year number 2 of being on strike. So my brother was at home also. He had nowhere to go to.
Wow.
And so just serendipitously, by the grace of God, we had an opportunity to come to college in the U.S.
Now, we're about the same age. We were just joking around that you're a youngster compared to me by 14 months. But
only.
But so when you were a kid growing up in Nigeria, observing the U.S. from afar, what was your impression of the U.S.? I mean, you said that it's the land of opportunity, but I mean, was it the kind of thing when you were a kid, like I want to go there because there's opportunities, or I mean, because I'm always curious in what people from other countries, how they view the U.S. So, like as a kid, if you can remember, like what was your image of the U.S.?
I do remember. It's interesting. My siblings have grown up. They always called me the American one.
Oh, really?
Yeah, I was, and partly because I've always gone against the grain. Mm-hmm. I was wired that way in many ways as a misfit. Mm-hmm. So, and that's a whole different podcast. I feel like I felt like a misfit even in my own culture, in my mm-hmm. own country. So even at a young age, I think I was drawn to what the United States has to offer, just intrinsically in a weird way that I can't explain. Mm-hmm. So I've always lived and thought and pursued things outside the box of my own culture. Sure. I've always questioned. I loved sports growing up. I didn't have the opportunity to play sports. Mm-hmm. There's a piece of me that wonders if I'd grown up in the U.S., how far I would have made it with sports. Mm-hmm. But one of my favorite things to do on Sunday, this podcast is on a Sunday. So on Sunday afternoon, like this afternoon, after church, I'd run home and turn on the TV and watch the NBA. Because that was the only time we could get the NBA in Nigeria was Sunday afternoons. And I learned to play basketball just by watching the NBA.
Really?
And it's like a piece of my heart always lived here in this country and this longing. So I found ways to consume that even as a little kid. Mm-hmm. And it's why I was always called the American one. I'm not still sure what exactly they meant by that.
Well, and I feel like that explains in some way or speaks to your success as an entrepreneur, because I feel like entrepreneurs generally, they go against the grain. I mean, when you say you went against the grain, like as a kid, were you ever bashing up against like the rules at school or anything like that? Or was it generally?
That's a great question.
Yeah.
I would say it was mostly at home.
Okay.
I was fairly quiet, timid, compliant at school. I actually didn't push against the grain. In large part to be just how we were raised to handle ourselves outside the home. I think I had a healthy fear of my parents too, and teachers, because I grew up in the school education system I grew up in.
Yeah.
We were spanked if we misbehaved. I'm not sure if that's still going on right now.
It's not going on, but in my school when I was growing up, that was the deal too.
Right.
Yeah.
So I think I had a healthy fear of authority, but I think at home and socially, I pushed limits, and in a culture where it was very much power was lived with the adult.
Yeah.
Especially if you're a man. It was a man's world.
Yeah.
If you're a man and if you're an adult, the term machismo. That's exactly the environment I grew up in. And so you tend to do as you are told. And that was not enough for me. So I got in trouble a lot for pushing back, asking why, for challenging the family hierarchy and social order of things. And in the world that you didn't, you just kind of did as you were told. I needed an explanation. I was the why kid. You tell me why this rule is important. I'm supposed to just do as you're told. So, and then even as a young kid, I remember even how even men treated their wives and women, and just didn't sit right with me. I emotionally, even within me, I pushed against that. Something ain't right, and I asked questions why, and I got in trouble for that.
So, what was it like when you got to the U.S.? So you show up, and you went to Notre Dame. Is that right?
I went to a college in the same community as Notre Dame.
Okay,
but I did not go to Notre Dame University.
Got it. I've always I feel like there's a contingent of folks that are somehow in our neighborhood that are somehow associated with Notre Dame.
We are, and we're a huge fan. And you know why Notre Dame is so important to me?
Why?
I connect that my earliest connection to this country is Notre Dame football.
Yeah, well
it's as important to me as being American.
Really?
I mean, I am a 17-year-old international student in 1996, and you moved to South Bend, Indiana. The whole world revolves around Notre Dame football.
That's it.
My first winter jacket that my uncle took me to get that fall was a Notre Dame jacket. It was almost like just imprinted on me, and I've been a fan ever since.
And so, I mean, what was the adjustment like, if there was one at all, when you started going to college in the U.S.? I mean, how was that for you?
Some of it was positive. Some of it was hard.
Well, that's where the growth is.
I was ready. I was ready. I mentioned that I felt like a misfit in my own country, and I needed the room to just spread my wings and fly and grow. So I was ready. I remember in college, friends would automatically assume I was sad to leave home. I couldn't understand, and that was most people's experience.
Yeah.
And at the time I arrived to the U.S., I was a very unhappy teenager. I was a late bloomer in most things. I didn't have a good relationship with my father at the time. That's since then is way better and has improved. But I left angry. I left unsure about who I was. I kept to myself. I was not involved with a whole lot of extracurricular activities growing up. Yeah,
that's hard for me to imagine.
I know.
You now,
and most people, when most people see my life these days, or even when I said I didn't have friends, they're like, "How's that even possible?" Yeah, I didn't have a lot of friends. Couldn't speak to anyone. Speech class my freshman year was a nightmare.
Yeah.
My friends that know me from those days, we often laugh and say how far I've come. So this country, in many ways, added so much to my flourishing because it allowed me to experiment and try and grow and try new things and grow and keep growing. And I became Yemi. The true Yemi, and it's an evolution of who I am today happened those first 3 years.
And do you think that was just a process of kind of becoming more confident to be yourself, like be who you wanted to be? Because I feel like I talk with a lot of creative people on this podcast, and it seems like there's this theme that comes along where they need to find their voice as a creative.
Right.
And it takes a while. Like you got to copy people for a while. You got to try certain things. But it seems like the vast majority of them say that the quicker they became confident with who they really were, and they can just be that person, and people react to that and they like it, and they get feedback. And so, I mean, you're obviously probably still doing it to some degree,
right?
As we all are, hopefully.
I want that to be clear.
but I mean, like, how long did it take you? Was it during college you figured it out, or was it soon after graduating from college? Because when I first met you, like, you couldn't have been more of a, you probably don't even remember meeting me the first time at Good Neighbors, and we were introduced by a mutual friend, and I was like, that guy's one of the friendliest people I've ever met in my whole life. So how long did it take it to come together for you?
Gosh, I don't know if I can say how long, but I can speak to the moment that I knew I had the gift of influence. Mm-hmm. I wasn't involved in a whole lot growing up. I felt suppressed, and maybe I'm trying not to place blame.
Yeah.
But I was a late bloomer.
Sure.
So my connection to this country and the environment that I had to try new things, I found that for the first time. I don't know why I didn't feel like I had that.
Yeah.
But this country and the environment I was in the Midwest, I went to a Christian university in northern Indiana. It provided that environment for me. But I do remember the day where I realized that I have influence. And by the way, my greatest fear till today is that I'm going to be alone. And it sounds silly for someone who, like you said, is quite friendly and knows a lot of people.
Yeah.
But that fear was even true then.
Really?
So my junior year, I went to, my school was small enough that during our homecoming week, which included games and different things like that, we did this thing called like a homecoming pageant that I think most people have experienced growing up in the U.S. in high school. I did not experience that. So my college had that. A few people had submitted my name, and I didn't even know how the process works.
Yeah.
But I do know I got a phone call and a voicemail. That's back in the days when we still use voicemail.
Yeah, sure.
And I played it, the voicemail in my dorm room, and it said, Yemi, congratulations, you're part of the homecoming court. And I asked my roommate, what is that? And they started to explain what that meant to me, and I had no framework for that. I still confused. What does that mean? How did I get chosen?
Yeah.
And he literally said, Yemi, that means people like you. And that surprised me. And I had to then fast forward is what do you do with that type of gift? And it leads me to some of the things I've done today.
Sure.
But that was the first knowledge of, here's a side of me that I never knew.
Well, and it gave you permission, I would guess, just to be yourself. Like
right.
people like it when I'm, because it's not like you were trying to impress anybody at that point.
Exactly.
You were just being yourself, and people, you got this validation.
Exactly.
Fast forward a little bit. How did you end up in Colorado Springs?
Opportunity.
Again, that's the theme.
This country truly is a land of opportunity. I had turned 30. Turning 30 was a really difficult season in my life. Some people say that 30 was great and the 40 was awful. Turning 40 was great for me.
I love turning 40.
Right.
It's like people were going to take me seriously.
Yeah, I know. I mean, our 40s and 50s. Yeah. They say that's when society looks to you as...
Yeah, we know what we're doing.
Yeah, we know what we're doing. We think. At least we have them fooled. But turning 30 was a really difficult season. I was at a crossroads, and vocationally, in my faith, even within who I am, in terms of who am I and what is my contribution to this world.
Yeah.
So I took a big step of faith to leave northern Indiana, the community I've known for almost 14 years, and decided I was going to move out west.
Nice.
That journey took me to California for almost a year to join a Christian denomination called the Christian and Missionary Alliance, who happened to have their headquarters in Colorado Springs.
Oh, okay.
At the time, they've moved. About a year ago now, they've moved. So I had came to Colorado Springs for a conference. I'm in California at this point, so I made the big decision to leave a community that I loved so much. I'm still Midwestern at heart. You can't get rid of the Midwestern in this man. I mean,
Sure.
I love all of it. You know, communities of 3,000 and 2,000, and Indiana is in my heart.
Yeah.
But I felt like I needed to leave a place that became home to grow and for a new adventure. They say critical adventure leads to our greatest formation, and I've experienced that multiple times. And that was one of those big decisions in my life, just like coming to this country. And moved to Colorado Springs after a year in California with an opportunity to start a new kind of church that my co-pastor and I were planning to do in San Diego.
Oh, okay.
When I came here for the visit and they said, this denomination asked, would you consider bringing this to Colorado Springs? I said, no way, no thank you. We were set on doing this in San Diego. And partly Colorado Springs was of no interest to me at the time was because of its reputation at the time we had called Christian Mecca.
Yeah.
Now, it sounds weird that a pastor at the time in the Christian faith would not be attracted to a place called Christian Mecca. It's not just weird, it's true. And I'm not the only one. Partly because we wanted to be a church that was about blessing the city. Not simply a church that was just about a Sunday morning experience.
Okay.
I've always believed that your faith is for something.
Sure.
So it's not the end, it's the beginning. Your faith is for something. And the church historically has, when done right, has always been a blessing to the city, as we can see it with the hospital system was originated by the church, and education and arts. And so I felt a better opportunity to do that in San Diego, because after all, this city is Christian capital, but that's not the case. I came back for another visit, and I began to learn about the Colorado Springs underneath this interesting brand that we have that is not so true of the city. It is true that we have a lot of Christian nonprofits, but there was so much more to this city.
Yeah.
And when I learned about it, I packed my bags and moved again.
Nice.
And we brought that opportunity to Colorado Springs.
Well, it seems like when I hear you talk about that, you were focused on using your faith to help build community. And I feel like when I first met you, that was the first thing that stuck out in my head was like, this guy's a community builder. Like he because when we met, so we'll talk about your Good Neighbors, but Good Neighbors had just opened. Like when we were looking to buy our house on Wasatch, we were walking around the neighborhood and we went over to where Good Neighbors were, and there was paper on the window and they were working. They were like, it's going to be opening soon.
Interesting.
And then we bought the house, and then it opened maybe like a month later.
Wow.
And so when I think about that place, obviously it's a business. You got to make money. And I want to talk about how you pivoted during the pandemic to, but when I think about Good Neighbors, I don't think about Yemi making money at the coffee shop. I think about it's a community center.
Right.
And it's a place that makes our neighborhood better. It's a gathering point. And so, I mean, it sounds like what brought you here was the idea of using your faith to help build community. And then you've started doing it in entrepreneurial.
Right.
And then you also do it in public service and have been, and you're going to be doing it even bigger. So, I mean, I guess it's kind of a wide question, but where did this appreciation for community come from?
I don't know who originated this quote, but it says the two most important days of one's life is the day you were born and the day you discovered why. It's a complete game changer.
Yeah.
When you know your why. And for me, my why is crystal clear, and there's no going back. Even when life is hard, or work is hard, when your why is clear, it keeps you grounded, it keeps you moving.
Yep.
And it's how I even discovered my own personal mission statement, which is to collaborate for the health, growth, and prosperity of Colorado Springs. So my own mission statement is tied to the flourishing of the city.
Sure.
And so I happened to have stumbled into this thing called triple straight leadership, or trisector leadership. Came out of a Harvard article years ago that was promoting this idea of leaders who have experience in a private, non-for-profit, and public sector are really primed and poised to handle some of the community's greatest challenges. I didn't plan it that way. It just happened that way from a love of, like you've identified, is the community. And so it's what's fueled me. It's fueled everything I do in this city. Every vocational decision I've made in this city has been to advance human flourishing in this city, the flourishing of our city. And so it stems from a place of my why.
So the why is community, building community.
That's a huge part of my why. Yep.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it shows, and maybe we'll just go ahead and I was trying to hang back a little bit on this, but you got some big plans, which is not a surprise to
anybody. I have no idea what you're talking about.
Do I get the
false?
Scoop?
False.
Is this what they call in the journalism? I get the scoop. So everybody who knows you knows that you're a natural leader, you're a natural community builder, you're a natural business person. So tell me about what your plans are in the next 3 months.
In the next...
or in the 2 months, I guess.
In the next 2 months, it will be public. What's today's date? Today is...
The 6th?
The 6th of February. My team and I are looking at an April 4th public announcement of me running to become the 42nd mayor of Colorado Springs. It's a big decision. It's one that my wife and I did not take lightly. Actually, we've been on this journey for about 20 months now. From the moment we were asked by some pretty significant leaders in this community to consider it. And talking to my wife initially, she said, crap, I knew this day was coming.
Yeah.
She said the day we got married, she held my hands at the altar and looked at me and knew that I'd be jumping off a cliff and she'd be jumping off with me. And she said, she wants to say no so bad, but it's because she's afraid. And I said, I'm afraid too. And she said, it's who you are, it's who you've always been. You have a natural calling for public service.
Yeah.
And to advance this city. If it means our family pays a price for a season, and if it helps advance the city, then perhaps it's worth it. And we've been taking the next step after next step after next step, and it's led us to this place. So yeah, this is going to be happening.
And so was this your idea first, or did people in the community come to you and say, we think you should do this, or was it some combination of the two?
I think the real answer is a combination.
Yeah.
It's not surprising that this would be part of my next step, because in some ways my leadership has been leading to this point.
Sure.
At the same time, there's so many other opportunities to help move the city forward than to run for public office, especially these days.
Yeah.
I am probably one of hundreds of people that hear these type of compliments that, oh, you'll be the mayor sometime. Or my favorite is when a friend of mine, actually the CEO of a major nonprofit in town, introduced me to another leader in town who is now the deputy chief of police.
Okay.
When we met, the three of us met at Good Neighbors.
Oh, yeah.
About 4 years ago, about the time it opened. And this CEO said, I'd like to introduce you to your next mayor of Colorado Springs.
Really?
As I've always heard that as a compliment. You know, it's honoring when people say things like that. I don't know if I believed it to be a reality or something I would want to pursue. Because politics is messy.
Oh, yeah.
It's messy.
It always has been, but now it's messy on steroids.
Right. It is messy on steroids. And a friend of mine said, you realize it's like the worst time to get into politics. And I said, I agree. But it's also the right time, because these days need a different kind of leadership. That phrase, that adage, desperate times call for desperate measures.
Yep.
As you can see, our desperate measures are not working. They're leading us to some really damaging places. And I feel like desperate times calls for a new and different type of leadership. Fresh leadership that is that is courageous, that to pursue the right type of initiatives and to pursue justice on behalf of the residents. It's desperate times call for a new and fresh type of leadership that leads with empathy, that sees others first. And I think we have an opportunity to restore human dignity, beauty and goodness in every human person, even when you don't agree.
Yep.
I think we need better examples of that. And desperate times also call for leaders who can lead with humility, who put the we before me, who hold power, who use power and hold power loosely for the sake of others.
Sure.
So whatever power or greatness that we have is really to help people, to help the masses, and in this case, to help the people of my city.
So when you think forward about, you run, obviously you wouldn't be running if you didn't think you could win. You run, you win, and then you're in office, and you hear these stories, or at least I hear these stories. Maybe I'm just like focusing on the negative side of things, of people that come in to whatever political office they're in, whether it's a mayor or state representative or whatever, and they have these big ideas, and then they get in and they realize, all right, this is a rough system, man. Like this is rough, and then the reality kind of hits, and you have to adjust and become realistic. And some, there are plenty of examples of people that managed to keep their ideals where they were and make stuff happen. So like, how do you, when you think forward and you think about, all right, when the rubber hits the road and I'm going to clash with some people and there's no way around it because I got a new way of doing things, what makes you think that you can keep your ideals in place?
Right. Well, the ideals of my values, I pray, never shift. And that's courage, empathy, and humility, as I've stated. The ideals of what I'd like to accomplish and the policy items and the challenges of the day, I believe that's what you're talking about, right? What makes me think I can do it? I don't know. I am not too proud or naive to say, I am the guy that can make it happen.
Yeah.
What I do know is my own experience, history in this community. I do know that I started a business at the tail end of the recession in this community. Yeah. When people said, are you sure the Wild Goose is going to make it? And all the naysayers were like, there's no way. We not only did it, but we helped catalyze the downtown revitalization Colorado Springs' experience. And when people said, it's impossible to get churches together, black, white congregations, Hispanic, Methodist and Catholic and Lutheran and Charismatic and Pentecostal and all kinds of traditions for them to come together to work together for the sake of the city, it can't be done. We did it. And that movement is called COS I Love You in this city. And when people said, there's no way we can get government to work better for the citizens. And in my case, my work at the city is being the small business administrator. Small business development administrator. And we did it.
Sure.
And I use we because my leadership was paramount, but I did not do it in isolation. But we've accomplished some impossible things. We've made our city more small business friendly. We're looking at new technologies that will unite all our government functions for the sake of the business resident. We've united all these churches who are serving the city on a regular basis, and now churches have a better name in our city than they used to. We have the largest volunteer movement in the city now of deploying people from what I call the most untapped resources of our city, the churches, now deploying them into schools and social services and parks and neighborhoods to make our city better, and to use my own experience as a business person to really catalyze the city. That's the experience that I have, and the imagination and the innovation and creativity that I will be bringing to that office. So while I am not ready, I know while there are realities around what can be done and what can't be done, I'm not willing to settle for that right now.
Yeah.
I am coming with what can be done and what I have done. And then we'll deal with some of those challenges as they come. And when all else fails, because I know those realities of leading a city is a real thing, but when all else fails, I hope to be an inspiration for young and seasoned leaders of what leadership looks like, what it looks like to disagree well and with respect, what it looks like to lead courageously, what it looks like to lead with empathy and humility, because that matters.
Yeah, it does.
As you take on our city's toughest challenges, how you lead matters, and it inspires others and inspires the next generation of leaders. That is going to happen regardless.
So I would imagine, if you think about kind of where this city's going, I feel like Colorado in general is just I'm working the conservation world when I'm not doing the podcast, and you see these stats of how many people are coming. By the year 2050, there's going to be like 3 million extra people, or maybe 5, I can't remember. And I always think about it from a natural resources perspective. But when you think about the growth of the city of Colorado Springs, I would imagine, you've got a vision for how you want things to grow, and then there's a competing vision kind of on the other side of the spectrum. And I mean, I don't want to go into like specific policies, because most people who listen to this are from other parts of the West.
Right.
But I mean, when you think about where you want this city to go, which they're saying at some point it's going to be larger than the Denver metro area,
right?
Which is crazy. It's like, I mean, what do you see? Like, what's your vision far out for where you think the city will go? And I mean, I know it's pretty broad, but
it is broad. And just one quick correction is that this city is projected to be larger than Denver proper.
Yes,
the Denver metro area will always be bigger than our metro, but because
that includes like Boulder and all that stuff, right?
Includes that Aurora and some of the surrounding. In Colorado Springs, it's the largest city in our metro area and the other 6 communities are fairly small. Got it. But we are supposed to be we're projected to be over 1 million, I think, by the year 2050.
That's crazy.
So that's that's double what we're
at 500,000 now,
about
right?
500,000, and there's 2022. So we're looking about 28 years being the largest city in the state. And yes, you're right. There's some growing pains and growth challenges that puts a burden on our natural infrastructure. One of the things I like about my city, Colorado Springs, is I find this connection to being a late bloomer. My city is a late bloomer. Yeah. And one of the benefits of being a late bloomer is being able to learn from others' mistakes. We have an opportunity to learn from the mistakes of other cities that have grown and are having all kinds of growth challenges. And it's one of the things that inspires me to run. I'm running on, one of my 3 points I'm running on is smart and responsible growth. The thing about growth is it's inevitable. When you look at the history of cities, there is no stopping. There's no such thing as stagnation. You're either growing up or you're growing down, as you've seen in some American cities. And the other side of growth, there's challenges on both sides. I like the phrase "healthy things grow," and parents of young children understand that. Like, our kids grow, but we can help shape their growth. So I think we have an opportunity to shape the growth of this city, Colorado Springs, and to keep some of its uniqueness, and to ensure that we limit the amount of losers. Because there are always winners and losers when city grows, as we can see with affordability in this community. And it's not limited to Colorado Springs. Cities across the world are experiencing this, but ours is unique with how fast.
It's wild.
And part of it is we've been ranked for so many years in a row now as being the number 1 best place to live in the U.S. By U.S. News and World Report. And what that ranking, it comes out of a series of interviews they have with citizens all over the U.S. And they ask the question, if there's any place that you could live in the country, where would that be? Colorado Springs remains the number 1 city for that.
It's really amazing. I mean, my wife and I lived in Boulder for like 7 or 8 years before we moved down here, and she had lived here right out of college. She was did the El Pomar Fellowship, and so
nice.
she had a really great experience. And we started. She got a new job that allowed her to work remotely, so we started thinking, well, do we have to be in Boulder? And we're like, why not Springs? Because we're always around here. And I look at everything from a very simple way of outdoor sports. Like I want to be running a lot, and I don't think there's a better city anywhere for being a big, thriving city that is right up against big mountains.
You got it.
I mean, I could ride my bike from my house. It'd be a long day, but I could do it. Ride my bike from my house and be on top of a 14,000-foot mountain and back home by the end of the day.
It's right behind you. I'm looking at it.
Yeah, you're looking at it right now. So, I mean, I do think people know about Colorado Springs, but they don't really know. And I think what you were saying, this whole idea about it's got this brand among, you know, if you're looking at it from the outside of like a lot of these, you know, Christian organizations and the military, but like you said, there's so many different layers below that. And like in the neighborhood where we live, I feel like there's just some of the most interesting people I've ever met, you know? Like, I mean, you're the second of my neighbors I've had on the podcast. So it's, I want to have more because they're just, everybody is so interesting.
You have a lot of interesting people that live in the city.
Yeah. It's a great place.
It's a gold mine of people, of talents, of skills, of strength and imagination. It really is. It's a very special city.
Well, and there's a diversity to it too. Like when we lived in Boulder, nothing against Boulder, but for the most part, you know, right now people that live there are extremely highly educated and have a lot of money. Right. And that's cool, I guess, but that's not how I grew up. Right. And I grew up where there's a pretty wide socioeconomic spectrum, and I feel like Colorado Springs brings that both in socioeconomics, in race. I mean, it's obviously it's Colorado, so the race is always going to be skewed one way. But it's been quite a surprise for me. We obviously knew we would enjoy living here, but it's far surpassed all of our expectations, just for the community aspect, mostly.
Right on.
So we've got kids about the same age, and one question I'm always interested when I'm talking to people I admire, how did having kids change your perspective on things? Because it was a drastic change for me.
It was. First of all, marriage was that first change. Mm-hmm. And then being the father of 3 beautiful, ornery kids changed that even to the next level. I feel like my leadership is being not only tested, but being groomed. Mm-hmm. Through my own family experiences. Yeah. I feel like it's brought shalom and peace to my own well-being and wholeness. Really? I am a workaholic.
You are.
Oh my goodness.
But it's all for good stuff though.
I know.
But that's how you can work yourself into a real problem because you're like, it's for other people.
It is. It truly is. About a couple of years ago, my wife, it was about a couple of years ago, my wife and kids went to visit my in-laws, so her family in northern Indiana. That's where my wife is from, where we met. And they were gone for almost 2 weeks, I believe. And I was an unhealthy person, getting up early, going to bed super late at midnight. They bring such balance and peace to my life to be able to think of others and force me enough to be able to stop and pause and slow down and just be with them, and to be with my daughter as I was on Saturday and just putting together 100, my 4-year-old, 100 puzzle pieces. And so it's been good. They've added to my well-being. They also help me grow because they also challenge all the stuff, the negative stuff that I have around impatience and, you know, learning how to communicate better. And if you can do it with young ones, which is hard, as you know. Yes. I mean, it pays off as we work with others and with our peers in the city. So it's been good. It's been it's a lot of work too, but it's been good.
I'm kind of jumping all over the place here, but when you think about leaders that you admire, and it could be business leaders, could be politicians, just who do you admire? Like, and you don't have to know them; they could be alive or dead. But like, who are your either mentors or people that you look to, and you're like, I think if I could adopt some of that person's personality or influence, then I'd be doing all right.
Right. By the way, you just opened a whole chapter that is dear to my heart, near and dear. So leadership development, leadership aptitude. I mean, this is one of the essence of my living, my why. I'm passionate about being developed. I'm passionate about developing others. I believe that every man needs a father, a brother, and a son, and every woman needs a mother, a sister, and a daughter. Those 360 levels of mentoring. We can do a whole podcast on this. But
I know where to find you. Keep doing.
In terms of leaders I admire, the one that I have admired for as long as I've lived in this country, and one that I'm still studying till today. I'm reading books about him, and even yesterday, I watched another documentary about him. I'm going to watch everything that I can find about him. Is a president, a U.S. president that I share a birthday with, and both of our birthdays are coming up on Saturday, and that is Abraham Lincoln.
That's a good one.
As everyone knows. And it could be just, I'm drawn to him serendipitously because we share the same birthday. I feel like God has a way of moving us towards people that we learn from, and I've certainly learned from Abraham Lincoln. I find a lot of my leadership qualities in his. I find I'm continually inspired by his leadership style and quality. So think of who he was. He was a leader for the times that America was. You know, they say you don't always get to choose the time chooses you. And I truly feel that about my leadership today. I mean, the country was divided.
Yes.
And if not of his leadership, God knows where our country will be today. I love that he was a leader in paradox.
Yes.
It's one of the marks of my leadership is there's neither here or there. And there's a third way. There's a Latin phrase called tertium quid, and it means belonging to both sides, but there's a third way of doing business. And Abraham Lincoln was a shining example of that tertium quid. You know, people often ask me, well, Yemi, what's your political allegiance? I'm like, I don't know. If it helps you to think of me as a Colorado Springs Democrat or as a Colorado Springs can, by all means, but I'm a registered unaffiliated, and my commitment, my affiliation is to the flourishing of this city. And I find a leader in Abraham Lincoln, who always was moving people towards something more.
Sure.
A leader who led also with courage, humility, and empathy, a man of the people. I find a leader who had intrinsic goodness, and people just liked who he was. It's a reminder that people are good. I know in these times we forget that, that we're all made in the image of God, and that people are good. I found a man who did that well and extended that blessing to people that didn't like him. I find a man too, by the way, this is really important, that was not perfect.
No, that's the thing that I think is so
he was not perfect. When you read some of the details of his history, he was not perfect.
No.
Hello. Me, I'm not perfect here, but what I love is this ever-growing person, evolving, not stagnant. And so he evolved. I find a man, too, that listens. He listens to people. He listens to his advisors. There's an old adage in my country of origin. Don't ask me to say it in my native language, but the proverb says, the wisdom of others keeps the king from being called a fool. Abe does that really well. But at the end of the day, he knows he has to make the call. And he has to be accountable for that decision. And so there's so much of his leadership, including his ability to command a room and give great speeches. And so I have studied this man, and because of my study of this man that I admire, I've also been learning about U.S. history. Abraham Lincoln gives this West African immigrant such a deep connection to the early origins of this country. So that's someone who is not alive that I continuously look up to and study the tension and the pain points around the story and see how he led through that and some of the strategies how he led through that, because these wisdom don't expire.
Yeah, no,
they're time tested, and so I believe that they're meant for the times we live in today. I got really passionate about that.
No, that's good. I want you to. I love it. And I love history too. So it's kind of two things that I'm a fan of. And I mean, I think earlier when you were talking about we did this, and one book that I read it probably 12, 13 years ago now, but called Team of Rivals by Doris Kearns Goodwin. And that whole
I'm going through that again.
Yeah. And it's dense, but that's all about how he surrounded himself with people that were better at their individual part of the equation than he was. Boom. And then the other thing, a lot of people haven't heard of this book, but it's been very important for me, is there's a book called Lincoln's Melancholy. And I don't know why I don't think it was never like a New York Times bestseller.
I'm going to write that one down.
I'll give it to you. I keep dropping all these books off at your doorstep, but it's really good. And it's about how Lincoln, you talk about, he's not perfect. And he suffered heavily from anxiety and depression for the vast majority of his life, and especially in his early years.
Right.
And to the point where he was suicidal multiple times.
Right.
And this book talks about how he was such a great uniter.
Right.
And not in spite of his mental health struggles, but because of his mental health struggles.
Come on.
He understood how to be empathetic. He understood what it meant, what it felt like to be down. And he wanted other people to feel good. And so he could communicate with people. And it's just, we were kind of talking this before we started recording about how sometimes the thing you don't like about yourself is actually can be one of your best assets.
Right.
And I think Lincoln is a perfect example of that, from a leadership, being able to connect with people, because he had this deep empathy.
Right.
That you can't fake that.
No, and I feel it's weird to pat yourself in the back and say, "This is what I'm really good at. Let's have a podcast." And I'll tell you what I suck at too. And my wife and I value vulnerability.
Yes,
because there's a human connectedness when we're vulnerable with each other. The attributes you've named about Lincoln, I really do feel such a huge connection to that. And I've never been suicidal. I think I was when I was a young kid. It was some of my challenges.
Sure.
Growing up in my home country, I had thoughts, but never acted on anything. But as a leader, even just this past week, I was so down. Yeah. I mean, my wife gets to see those parts of me.
Sure.
And it's this engagement in the public arena where you want to inspire others. And you're living in this tension of constant inspiration of people, because that's what they need. It's empathy. It's moving people. It's helping. It's reminding people of the world that is to come. Like there's something better, of a future city in our case. But at the same time, feeling this burden of it, and feeling the burden so deeply that it makes you down. And the people I'm closest to get to see that.
Sure.
Depending on who we're with, as my wife and I, she would tell you that the people that I know as the best, like literally, this happened over the holidays. We were with some friends in town, and I just sat by myself, and disconnected, introvert Yemi doing his own thing, and that's a side of me that is real, but a lot of people don't see. But it's a leadership burden. It's a paradox.
Well, it is, and I think
it's that paradox I was talking about earlier.
I just study people, and I love presidential history, but Theodore Roosevelt is the guy that I'm obsessed with. And I think people have this idea on the surface that he's this overly confident, tough guy, riding around on horses, shooting guns, all this kind of stuff. But when you really dig into who he was a pretty scared dude who could be overcome with depression or anxiety. Right. And what he found made him feel better was action and go. And you can, Theodore Roosevelt, I don't even know if I'd like him if I met him, because he talks so much and he's kind of a loudmouth. But I think these there's not a single person, I think, who's accomplished great things doesn't have two sides to them. And I think sometimes the flaws are what make the person interesting and what give them fuel. So
it is a fuel. And we live in a time where superhero movies are everywhere, and you see that in the hero's greatest struggle is where their power comes from.
Yep.
And there's that two sides of the leader, and every leader has that everybody has that, really, because I believe everybody has leadership in them. We just all play different roles in this world in terms of our leadership. But it's why I believe we need to be grounded with the right relationships, with the right books, with the right practices that remind us we're more than just our struggles and our successes. Because neither one of those will satisfy. And it's maddening. You read many of this, you read history, and you see that sometimes leaders go crazy.
Oh, yeah.
So if we're not grounded in rhythms, and by the way, the word for humility, and it comes from the Latin word humus, which just means from the earth, from the ground. So to be grounded in things that are more than just those extremes, I think is really what carries us through. And you read, and you're a student of American history, at least I can tell through the people you study. But you see that when you study our history, many of these leaders had friendships that they were close to that ground them.
Definitely.
And I know life was different. Life was more communal, like the environment I grew up in Nigeria.
Sure.
Wealth sometimes has permitted us to be able to live in isolation. So we have to chase after those relationships. We have to chase after those friendships that really ground us.
I think that's so important. I think the whole community thing, that's what one of the things I really appreciate about everything you do is I read that book called Tribe by Sebastian Junger.
Oh, yeah. Thank you.
Oh, yeah. But we are a species that needs to have community. Individually, we're nothing. I mean, a good mean dog could take one of us out, no problem. But as a community, we're unstoppable. And so,
what's that phrase? Lone wolves die.
Yeah.
We're not meant to be alone. Yeah.
No, definitely not. You mentioned a few books. What books have helped you in your personal and professional journey? Any books that come to mind?
I can tell you what books I'm reading today.
Yeah.
Team of Rivals.
Oh yeah.
Again,
that's a good one. I need to reread that. It's so good. And
so
Doris
good.
Kearns Goodwin is just. I met her one time, and I
What?
told her, and she's written some books about Theodore Roosevelt, and I said, Miss Goodwin, just so you know, other than you, I know more about Theodore Roosevelt than anybody in this whole place. And she thought it was funny.
That's awesome. It's a good one. It's dense. It's a lot. What I like about it is not just the story around my hero and interwoven with his story, but it's also been, for me, as of late, it's a good reminder of how far we've come, of what life used to be like in the U.S., and how to practice gratitude even in these moments when it seems like our world is coming to an end.
Yes.
We're not even close, Ed. In a world where men and fathers died at age 45,
Sure.
and where women died in childbirth, where children were dying easily from smallpox. I mean, so I'm reading it differently now with different lenses. I'm going, holy cow.
That's what history, that's
life,
the
life
best
was,
thing.
Yeah.
It makes you appreciate now.
I've been telling my wife that I think one of the greatest sicknesses of the times we're in is how far removed we are from our own history. And if we can ground our reality in the history of our land, I mean, we're just talking 200 to 300 years ago.
Sure.
It will bring things into perspective, including the division that we're having today. I used to say, gosh, divisions are at an all-time high. Not really.
Yeah.
Read Team of Rivals, you realize, or watch or read anything around that historical time, you'll realize. So it doesn't make it okay. It gives me hope. Sure. That all it takes is one leader or you to make a difference, and society begins to heal. And so we can see that over time after time after time. So Team of Rivals is one that I'm really enjoying as of late for so many obvious reasons, as we've mentioned already.
Yes.
Think Again by Ed
Roberson. That one's so good. I listened to that because he reads it, and so good.
So good. I mean, he opens the book by talking about, if I've used this story several times, if Ed, you ran into your friend and you saw them still using Windows 95 software, what would you tell them? Why?
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
And so the whole premise of the book is to
reevaluate.
And that's just life, I mean, we're supposed to think again, and that's just one aspect of the book. I feel like the title doesn't do justice to the entirety. For me, it brought healing to my imposter syndrome. I would tell you that as an immigrant, as a minority, and as one who's been invited to a place to be able to run for American political office, no one feels more of an imposter than this man, to the point of it used to be fear.
Yeah.
Now, Adam Grant has a way of taking that fear into a skill.
Yeah, it's a benefit.
Right.
It's just like the thing with Lincoln, how his depression was a benefit, and the imposter syndrome. I mean, I remember that part in the book. He lays out these examples. I think it maybe was from Iceland.
He did.
Yeah, of somebody who just had the just overwhelming imposter syndrome, and that's what people liked.
Right.
Because this person was not making up nonsense promises like, I can solve all your problems. Like, we'll figure this out together.
And Adam uses that story of this lady who was invited to be, I think, to run for prime minister. And she felt the imposter syndrome. But one of the things he recognized in that syndrome is two things. People with imposter syndrome, so if you're listening and you deal with this, you have humility and you have courage.
Yep.
There's something about that imposter syndrome that leads to just allowing you to be on your best, not settling, knowing that you have to. There is no settling. Like, you have to make sure that your hard work follows the opportunity. Like, because you know that fear of, geez, if I'm found out, of if any day the bottom drops and all. So it just keeps you just keeps you more sharp.
Yeah.
And continuously sharp, and it gives you enough humility also to know that, gosh, what an incredible opportunity this is, and I have to use this for something great. And so it's been able to frame this season for me as I run for public office. And
that's great.
And bring a lot of heat. I'd say another book, Where the Crossroads Sing. I don't know if you've read that.
No, it's on our shelf. My wife read it and loved it.
Excellent.
Really?
So I'm trying to do a nonfiction.
Yep.
Like we talked about, Think Again.
Yes.
So I'm naturally drawn to that. That's probably what I've read the most.
Sure, same here.
Then I'm also trying to do a fiction.
That's what I'm not good at.
I wasn't good at that till 3 years ago.
And now you love it?
Yeah, now I'm digging it. And I listen to most of my fiction. And what it does for us as leaders, it allows our mind to play.
Yes.
It increases creativity. And as one who speaks, whether it's a leadership development talk or as a pastor at my church, I find that it makes its way to even my speaking ability.
Yeah, you're a storyteller. Because at the end of the day, you're a storyteller.
Bingo.
And if you can't tell these stories, I mean, you got to be able to connect with people, and right. I think that's true.
So it is true, and I don't judge me. But 3 years ago, I had to start with something that was easy that everybody loved. I started with Harry Potter.
I love Harry Potter, man.
So I've always been a nonfiction. So fiction, nonfiction, fiction, and then history.
Okay,
are the three categories that I pursue.
I think can't go wrong with that.
Right.
Yeah, and Harry Potter, man. Harry Potter, that woman, she tapped into something in our consciousness, because I mean she's made over $1 billion on those things.
Her ability to, we talk about the universe, that's what writers do, even with superhero comics. But her ability to create this universe and this reality and our whole existence with characters and emotions and feelings, and it's next level stuff.
I read the first one of those. I was on a mountain climbing trip, and I read it at like the advanced base camp, which was like 21. I know it was like 20,000 feet. I was spending the night at 20, and I remember we were up there for a few days, and my brain wasn't quite working right, but I was so locked into that book. I was like, this is a good book if my half functioning brain can read it.
Oh, that's the ultimate endorsement. Yeah. Seriously, that is the ultimate endorsement.
J.K. Rowling, if you're listening, I love your book. In my oxygen deprived brain.
If you can hit someone whose brain was only half functioning,
it was the equivalent of being like really, really, really drunk, and I loved it. Well, man, I've my life is much better for knowing you and your family.
Thank
and
you.
Your oldest son is hilarious and cool. And my oldest daughter, they're pals. And
they are pals.
They
met at the preschool.
They met at preschool.
Yeah, I remember that.
And so anyway, it's just been awesome getting to know you. Thank you for doing this. Thank you for putting your talents towards building communities.
Thank you.
Because, I mean, you could be putting all these talents in a lot of different directions. So the fact that you're doing it so that people like me get to benefit and all of our neighbors and ultimately the whole city, it really is inspiring. And
Thank you.
This city is better because you're around. And so I can't wait to see where it all goes.
That's very kind of you to say. That means a lot. I really do.
Well, it's 100% true, man. I'm glad
you.
we finally got to do this.
Me too. Thank you for inviting me. And there's no greater honor than to tell one story.
Yeah, I mean, we'll do it again.
I'd like to. So much more to discuss. It would be interesting to do this again, depending on where I'm at with.
Yeah, we'll make it happen.
Yeah.
There's always, when we went to lunch the other day, we talked for like 2 hours, so we just need to set up microphones. All right, man.
Just start recording.
Yeah. Hey, it's Ed again. Thanks so much for listening to the podcast. I know your time is valuable, so it means the world that you spend it listening. If you want to support the podcast and help it to continue to spread and grow, there are a few ways you can help. Number one, pass it along to a friend or share it on social media. Word of mouth recommendations are the most powerful way for ideas to spread, so I'd love it if you could share the podcast with a few pals who might enjoy it. Number two, you can go to Apple Podcasts and give it a 5-star review. Good reviews encourage the Apple overlords to suggest the podcast to others. So there's a link in the notes if you'd be so kind as to give it 5 stars. Number 3, you can support the podcast financially via Patreon, and there are exclusive benefits for those who do, including a monthly behind-the-scenes newsletter, Mountain and Prairie stickers, live and recorded video chats with podcast guests, and much more. Number 4, I've also got 2 emails that I send out. The first is my weekly email called Good News from the American West, which I send out every Wednesday. It's only positive news, something we can all use a little more of these days. And my other email is my bi-monthly book recommendations email. One email every other month with 5, 6, 7, or 8 books that I've recently read and highly recommend. The thousands of people on both of these lists will vouch for me. No spam or other funny business. And number 5, finally, check out my online store for Mountain and Prairie stickers, shirts, and coffee mugs. I've got some really cool designs from Western artists with more on the way. So head to mountainandprairie.com/shop to check it all out. I'd love to connect with you. I'm on Instagram and LinkedIn, so look me up on either of those platforms by my name or through the links on my website. All right, that's it. Thanks so much for your support.